Welcome. I'm Leslie Canham.
I'm Mary Gavoni.
I'm Linda Harvey.
I'm Olivia Wan, and together we are the Compliance Divas. Welcome to the Compliance Divas podcast. My name is Olivia Wan, and I'll be your moderator today. In this episode, we are gathering insights from a dental equipment repair technicians, all about the do's and don'ts. Have you ever been frustrated with the maintenance and repairs of all your dental equipment? With the heavy-duty infection control that we put our equipment through, it can be hard on our equipment. So in today's episode, we're going to interview our guest, Donnie Busey with Dental Solutions. As the Compliance Divas, we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating regulatory compliance to keep you on course. Please subscribe to the Compliance Divas podcast through your favorite podcast channel, or you can visit our website, thecompliancedivas.com. Any resources that we mention during this episode can be found in the show notes. Please submit your questions to support@thecompliancedivas.com. So let's get started. Donnie, we'd love to know what your thoughts are about the most common issue that you identify as it relates to handpieces.
Well, the biggest issue is not enough preventative maintenance on it. They're not getting the handpieces cleaned and oiled as they should. All those handpieces have little bearings in them, and they all have to have plenty of oil in it. If not, those bearings will lock up, and then you're going to have problems. And then out comes the money.
That's a good point, is the preventive maintenance. And so is that something that you issue reminders when you're working with clinical teams?
Yeah, when I start seeing a lot of handpieces coming to me, I go to the team and I say, hey, show me how you're oiling and cleaning your handpieces. And there's different ways to do it. You've got automatic handpiece oilers, and there's also you can just do it manually. You can just take that handpiece right off, put a couple drops of handpiece oil in it, and run it for about 20 seconds, and you're ready to go. It's just a matter of them taking the time to do it. And if they'll do it, things will run a lot better.
I agree. And I always encourage them to download the instructions for use, depending on the brand of handpiece that they're using, and either compile a notebook of IFUs or throw them into a binder or scan them as a PDF so that they can reference them. But hands down, if they don't maintain it properly, they will not last very long, and they are expensive. Linda, what's your thoughts on some questions?
Connie, that's some valuable information, because even though teams know they should be taking care of the handpieces and doing the preventive maintenance, we know that they all get busy. And so that's an important key. And especially when there's new team members on board that may not understand the significance of doing that. So I'm glad you're drawing attention to that. But in addition, could you elaborate for us on some dental equipment repairs and what you see some of the common causes are, or issues that you run into?
Well, yeah, of course, there's a ton of different kinds of dental equipment in a dental office. I mean, anything from air compressors, vacuums, chairs, stools, lab equipment, you got it all. One of the big things that I see are the sterilizers. They have a lot of trouble. Those things have valves in there that's got little poppets on it, and if it gets any kind of debris inside there, it throws errors, and then you're shut down. And if you're an office that's only got one sterilizer in there, you're in a lot of trouble. So the biggest thing on that is, let's just say the Midmark M11. They've got something called Mid Clean, and you need to run that through your machine once a month to help keep it all cleaned out, all the gunk in there, to keep those out of those little poppets, which clog up very easily. Then you've got vacuums too. Your vacuum, your suction machine, that thing's got a filter on it. You need to stay on top of that, keep that cleaned out. If you don't clean it out, you're going to lose the suction and also possibly damage your equipment. And that's a couple things. If you want to talk about more, we can talk about more also.
I have a couple questions on those first. So when you talk about using the mid-clean product on the M11, so it sounds like it's really important to follow the manufacturer's instructions for use on these devices, right?
Definitely. That's the best thing for all the equipment is follow the manufacturer's preventative maintenances that they've got. They've got them set up for weekly, daily, weekly, monthly, annually even. So just read your operator's manual and it'll tell you for the most part what needs done.
That's perfect. So behind the sterilizers and the vacuum, what would you say are the third most common item that you see, Donnie?
Well, we see a lot with the air compressors too. The air compressors also have filters in them that need to be changed out regularly. You need to clean the machine. I mean, they do have intake air filters, but if your room and the machine itself is not kept clean, it can suck some of that debris in.
So did I just understand you to say if the room is not kept clean where the air compressor is located? That's a really important detail. It sounds like a housekeeping detail.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the places I've seen the air compressors be put at before. Uh, they need to be kept at room temperature. You need vents inside that room to keep the heat down and keep it warm also. But yeah, I've seen them in an outside building attached with a dirt floor even. So you've really got to use common sense when it comes to compressors and vacuums.
Well, those are two important pieces of equipment and very expensive pieces of equipment in dental practice. And so understanding how they work is really important. And I would say it even starts with leadership, Donnie, wouldn't you? The doctor needs to know a little bit about the device before he or she buys it, not just buy on price alone.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they've got several different factors to look at, like uh, how many ops can that air compressor run? If you run too many ops, that air compressor, it runs continuously, and they're not made to run continuously. An air compressor is supposed to run for so long and shut down, especially with a dental air compressor, because what it's going to do every time it shuts down, it's going to blow air back through a filter, and that gives you your uh, dry air instead of your moist air. So you really got to stay on top of that. Make sure that thing's running the way it should.
Well, Donnie, you just reminded me of a point that we discussed during the peak of the pandemic, and that was the fact that compressors are only meant to handle so many suction lines, one or two HVE lines and a few saliva ejectors. But during the pandemic, we saw many more hygienists begin to use their HVE line and causing some taxing that piece of equipment to work overtime, I guess you would say.
Yes, those vacuums are set up by how many users are being used. And when we say users, we're not talking about one person. We're talking about a user would be one HVE. An SVE is considered a half user. And say you're using nitrous and you've got it hooked to another HVE. So right there's 2.5 users, right off the bat, just one operatory. And a lot of these vacuums are set up for, 3 to 4 users is a common one. So you've really, your vacuum really needs to be, I don't know how you'd say it. You really need to watch it more than you do your air compressor when it comes to users.
And I think that's an important point for our listeners to kind of lean in, especially those that are new to dentistry, is to understand what that means. Because when they're complaining that the vacuum is not working very strong or there's a problem with it, that could be part of the issue.
Yes, it's a big part from what I see. A lot of times I go into these offices and, you should have a lot bigger vacuum unit than they do, but that's what they've been sold, and it's just not big enough.
No, I totally understand. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Donnie. Thank you. Back to you, Olivia.
Donnie, that's interesting. I never thought about how you'd calculate users as it relates to taxing the suction unit. That's very interesting. I know Leslie's anxious to pick your brain as well. Leslie, what's on your mind?
Well, I just want to just recap what I've heard and just kudos to you, Olivia, for saying compile an owner's manual on the equipment that you have. So instructions for use. And Donnie was telling us all about hand pieces. Oh boy, do I hear a lot of gripes about hand pieces that break down and are malfunctioning. So the maintenance there is really important. And then I'm also excited to remind our listeners that some companies do have a product, like you mentioned with Midmark, that is recommended for use once a month. How many of us are checking with the manufacturers of our units, whether it's a sterilizer or other units where there's some kind of product that can be used to help keep it functioning better? Um, Donnie, what other preventative items should we be looking at besides instructions for use and manufacturers and drug additional products that you could use? Is there anything else that we can do on either a monthly, weekly, or annual basis for equipment that you can help our listeners really lock into?
Well, we hit the big three right there. That's your biggest ones. Of course, you've got your X-rays, your panos. There's not there. I mean, you can go in and have those tested to make sure the KVPs are being put out right. Uh, but I would say that's probably the biggest ones that you really got to look at.
And
Uh,
then another question I have is, could you give us off the top of your head like a calendar of things that people should be looking at? Like every week you should be doing this, every month you should be doing this, and at least once or twice a year doing that. It's some of the equipment that we maintain to help us make our own checklist.
Well, that's where you go back to your operator manuals, and I'd probably shoot that back over to Olivia, let her kind of answer that question a little more.
And Donnie, I remember working with a young dentist, female dentist, and she was setting up her practice. Everything's brand new, ground up. And I was so impressed with her because she took every operator manual, every IFU, and created a calendar of tasks. And when I complimented her on it, she looked at me like, doesn't everybody do this? I paid a lot of money for all this stuff, and I want to make sure it lasts a long time. So she just basically took a highlighter pen and went to the instructions how to maintain it, and then created a calendar for her staff. And I think that's critical, as you mentioned, Donnie, to extend the life of the equipment. And then, if we relate back to handpieces for just a minute, that they order all different kinds. And so it's a little challenging if the brands are different and there may be some little differences on how something is to be maintained, such as if you're using a Midmark sterilizer and then a different brand. So that's why I always feel more comfortable in referring them back to their IFU, their instructions for use, and then maintain those logs. And it could be as simple as retaining your invoice. If you bill a client, I'm sure you detail it out on an invoice what you did. And so if I was working with one of your clients, if it was a mutual client, I would recommend that they scan your invoice to equipment maintenance and make that a log so they could track, hey, when's the last time we had the sterilizer maintained and what did we have done? When's the last time we replaced a seal and so forth? So it might be just a little bit more time involved, but when we look at extending the life of this valuable equipment, I think it would be well worth the costs. I really appreciate you joining us, Donnie. And I think before we close, the Divas would have a couple of more questions. Leslie, back to you.
Well, it's more of a comment than a question. Donnie, I was at a dental office where they had brand new equipment just about a month ago, and they asked their dental rep who sold them the equipment, or the dental rep that supplies them with their usual disposable supplies, about setup, and they were given misinformation. And I redirected them to go back to the manufacturer and get the right information. Um, Olivia's information about her one doctor creating a calendar of tasks is an awesome idea, along with the instructions for use. Do you have any other thoughts for how sometimes dental offices are misguided and what you have to do to get them back on track? Because you see obviously the end result of somebody that did not take care of their equipment. What can you share with us to help us avoid any of those issues?
Well, more or less just do your homework before you're buying your equipment. It's get online, look at that stuff, make sure you're getting the equipment that you need that's big enough for your office. That would be one of my biggest things. I would personally rather see you buying more equipment that's from the US. And for one reason I say that is a lot of the tubing and pieces that we have to repair it will be more likely on hand if you buy US made products.
That is a great point. I didn't even think of that. And
Yeah, and one other thing that, a lot of doctors don't think about is buying used equipment compared to buying new equipment. Yes, you may have some problem with the used equipment, but you can also have problems with new equipment also. Personally, I like some of the older dental chairs than I do the newer ones. They put so much on these dental chairs, and there's so much that can go wrong. Go back to the basics, You don't have to always have the best and newest.
that's my husband always says that whenever we buy an appliance, he says the more bells and whistles there are, the more can go wrong.
Exactly.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Linda, do you have a comment to add?
Tony, I want to say thank you for joining us. It's been very informative because there's so many basic things that you've reminded us of, just from the simple things like following the manufacturer's instructions for use, looking and doing some research before you buy a piece of equipment. And it dovetailed nicely into Olivia's example of her client that created that entire check sheet based on the manufacturer's instructions for use. It makes perfect sense to protect your investment.
Thank you, Linda. So Donnie and I have known each other for several years. I teach a course at Murray State University for one of the local dental societies there, and Donnie has a booth set up and support of the meeting. And I've always impressed because he'll have some dental equipment set up as well, so people can see his work and also how he restores dental equipment. Some people may not have the budget for brand new equipment. So Donnie's doing a great job out in the field and servicing clients. We appreciate you, Donnie, taking time to share your insight and wisdom with our audiences. Donnie, this information has been so helpful, and I know that our compliance diva, Mary, wanted to be a part of this, and I believe we've covered all of the points that she wanted to share with our audience today. So thank you for joining us. As the Compliance Divas, we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating regulatory compliance to keep you on course. Please submit any questions to support@thecompliancedivas.com, and any resources can be found in the show notes. Thanks again, Donnie, and we'll see our audiences next week.